it reads, compare and contrast the structure of two or more texts and analyze how the differing structure of each text contributes to its meaning and style. So now I'm going to go ahead and break that down. When we are analyzing two texts using the standard RL 8.5, you as students should be able to do the following. You should be able to examine the similarities and differences in the organization of two or more texts. Then you should be able to examine how each of the structures that is different adds to the meaning and style of the text. So let's look a little bit further. Some of the vocabulary words that you should know in order to accomplish that learning target are the word analyze. To analyze something is to critically examine. It's to look at one part in context of the whole. So if we're reading a poem, we might analyze one particular standard, and we might really focus on that one standard to determine the meaning of that poem. The word compare. The word compare is when you measure the similarities and differences between two things. It could be two texts, it could be two people, it could be two places, two objects, etc. Okay, so if you're comparing, you can measure the similarities and differences, and oftentimes we see the word compare and contrast. Okay, so contrasting is when you're showing how they are different, and comparing is when you're showing how they are the same. This last word, style. Style is how you do something. So for example, I might have a certain style of clothing I wear, or I might like a certain style of music. So style refers to a particular manner of doing something. It also can refer to a characteristic to an individual. For example, certain writers or certain actors or actresses sometimes only perform one style. And also in writing, style can refer to the use of figurative language, the use of word choice, how the poet or author writes their sentences, the punctuation they use, and even the words that they use. Some questions to ask yourself when we're using RL 8.5. The questions that you should ask are, how do the structures of each text differ? Again, the word differ means how are they different? How are the structures of the two texts similar? How does the structure of each text impact its meaning or style? The word impact meaning effect, as in what effect does the structure have on the meaning of the poem and on the style of the poem? And then the last question is, which structure is more effective and how it contributes to its meaning or style? This word contributes means add to. So for example, if a poem is 4 stanzas long, you might ask yourself, why did the author put that poem in 4 stanzas? And how does that help me understand the meaning of the poem and analyze the style of the author? So for example, each stanza might play a critical role in helping you determine the theme. And that would be how the structure, the fact that it's in 4 stanzas, contributes to the meaning of the poem. So this past week, we read 2 poems. The first poem that we read was called Jabari, Unmasked, and the second poem we read was called We Wear the Mask. So what I'm going to do right now is kind of talk and walk you through a comparison of those 2 poems. Very basic questions that you can ask yourself in analyzing these poems, very surface level questions. How many stanzas are in each poem? So you look at that, you can easily determine the number of stanzas simply by looking at each poem. Another question that you can ask yourself is there figurative language in each poem? Okay, do you see any similes or metaphors or personification? And don't just stop at asking, can I identify them, but think about what they mean. Think about what that figurative language means in the context of the poem. Another question would be, is there repetition of any words or phrases? Repetition plays a key role in helping us understand the meaning of a poem. For example, at the end of each stanza, does the author repeat a certain line or a certain word? That would be a critical line or word in helping you determine the meaning of the poem, helping you determine the theme of the poem. How are the poems similar and how are the poems different? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to actually show each of the poems that we read, and I'm going to start with Jabari Unmasked, since that was the first poem that we read. So Jabari Unmasked, one thing you should recognize is the year that it was written. This poem here was written in 2017. So right away, you know that it is a current poem. It was written by Nikki Grimes, and you may recognize her. You may have read other works by her. Here is your introduction. It's very important that you always read your introduction because it will give you a better insight into the meaning of the poem, and it will help you understand what you are about to read. One thing I want to talk about is this phrase right here, the striking line. When you see a phrase like that, you know that that's the author telling you that this is a very, very critical, very important line of the poem. Okay, and you should have been explained what the golden shovel was, the golden shovel form. Okay, so let's look at this poem. When you look here, you can see that there are certain words that are bolded, and they are bolded all down this column here. Okay, so let's look at the bolded words. The bolded words say, "We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties." So that right there is that golden shovel rule, okay? So it says the striking line appears word for word at the end of the lines in the new poem. So this is a new poem. It was written again in 2017, and it's telling you that this line, what I just read, appears in another poem. Well, in fact, it does, and I'm going to go to that poem right now. The poem that it appears in is called We Wear the Mask, and that poem was written in 1896. So right there, you can see how these poems are different, but we're also going to see how they are very, very similar. So in 1896, this poem was written by Paul Laurence Dunbar, and you can see in this very first stanza, you can see that he actually wrote exactly what Nikki Grimes used at the end of her stanzas. At the end of every line, you would see this exact stanza. And in fact, we do. So we wear the mask that grins and lies. Here it is. We wear the mask that grins and lies. Next line. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. Here we have. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. Next line. This debt we pay to human guile. Here we have it. This debt we pay to human guile. Next line. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile. And mouth with myriad subtleties. And mouth with myriad subtleties. So that right there is a similarity between these two poems. They are in fact connected. Nikki Grimes did not make a mistake when she ended each line with that stanza. She was making reference to this poem written in 1896. So while I'm talking about We Wear the Mask, I also want to talk about figurative language. Figurative language is language that is not meant to be taken literally. So what it says on the page is not really what it means. You have studied figurative language, I'm sure, since you were very, very young in elementary school. You probably started off with similes and metaphors, and you moved on to personification and onomatopoeia, and then you probably talked about irony. You've talked about these examples of figurative language. So let's look at a couple of examples here in We Wear the Mask. The first thing I want to point out is where it says right here, we wear the mask that grins and lies. That would be an example of personification. Why is it personification? Well, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what does personification mean? Personification is the giving of human-like characteristics to something that is non-living. So we wear the mask being an object, okay, and that grins and lies. So the mask, what they use to cover their face. Now, again, it should have been explained to you that we're not talking about a mask like we're wearing for the coronavirus. We're talking about something that conceals who we really are and who we want others to see us as. Another example of figurative language is in line 12 and 13. Lines 12 and 13 is a metaphor, and that metaphor is showing how long the journey of suffering has been. So it's comparing, remember, a metaphor compares, it is comparing people's lives to long and difficult journeys. Therefore, It would be a metaphor. Also, that's figurative language. So we should always pay close attention to figurative language and really analyze it. Don't just say, oh, that's a simile. Oh, that's a metaphor. I know that's a metaphor. No, you need to analyze it. Okay, remember, we're analyzing here. We're breaking it apart. We are critically examining it. We're critically examining it to help us understand the meaning. So right here, we understand the meaning of the people that are being talked about in this poem have lived a very difficult life, have gone on a very difficult journey of life, which is, you know, part of the reason why they're wearing the mask, to hide how they really feel. Okay, the mask grins and lies. So right there, they put this mask on to portray themselves as happy when we know deep down their journey has been long and they are not in fact happy. Okay, I'm going to go back to Jabari Unmasked, and I want to talk to you guys about word choice. Word choice is critical, okay? An author does not just choose their words easily. An author chooses words that they believe will best convey their message to you, the reader, okay? So when you're reading something, you need to analyze the word choice. So oftentimes we get to a difficult word and we might, you know, stumble a little bit, and we won't spend the time that we should analyzing that word and analyzing why the author chose that word. So I'm going to do that right now very quickly. Another word for word choice. So if I say, you know, what is the word choice the author uses, I could also say word choice means, or diction means word choice. Okay, that is a word that you will start to see as you progress through school. So if the question says, analyze the author's choice of words or diction, you know that that means word choice. So I want to scroll down here and I want to look at where it says spirits here, right here. So it says, still the world needs the dreams we offer, and should we leave those dreams bleeding on the road, we'd shrink our own hearts. So right here, I want to talk about the words bleeding hearts. Okay, bleeding hearts. What image does that create in our mind when we hear the word bleeding hearts? Okay, I also want to talk about this right here, spirits ripped and torn. That's very, very graphic. It creates a negative image in our mind. It creates a horrific image in our mind of spirits being ripped and torn, spirit of a person being ripped and torn, basically meaning that their spirit was so broken and so defeated, their hearts are bleeding. And so the author, Nikki Grimes, chose those words for a reason. Not only were they the words in We Wear the Mask, but she wanted to highlight those words because that's how the speaker in the poem feels. And so she wants to point out that negativity. That would be diction, okay? So again, I want to go back here to these questions. How many stanzas are in each poem? Is there figurative language? We just analyzed that. Is there repetition of any words or phrases? We analyzed that as well. We talked about that golden shovel rule, how Nikki Grimes repeats, although not in the same manner, she repeats that very first stanza that we see here. I also want to point out right here, we wear the mask is repeated. We wear the mask, here it is in the second stanza, and here it is in the third stanza. We wear the mask. So again, the author here, Paul Laurence Dunbar, is trying to really, really emphasize the fact that people are not showing who they truly are. They're not showing their true emotions, their true feelings. They're wearing this mask. So that would be repetition of a line. Okay, how are the poems similar and how are the poems different? Obviously, the difference would be the fact that this one was written in 1896. This one here is more modern. Another difference would be the length of the poem, okay, the length of the poem. Another difference would be that this poem here uses what's called the golden shovel rule. Again, it's right here in the introduction, or the golden shovel form. And however, they do have similar themes. They do have similar ideas that are being represented about how people will not show who they truly are. Identity, that's the theme that we're talking about in our first unit. So how do we conceal our identity, or what ways can we conceal our identity, or why do we conceal who we really are? Okay, so again, this is standard RL 8.5, comparing and contrasting the structure of two or more texts and analyzing how the differing structure of each text contributes to its meaning and style.